Hello and welcome to Bags of Action. My name is Pete and this is a 5-minute Bags of Action review of Top Gun Maverick from 2022. After more than 30 years of service as one of the Navy's top aviators, Pete Mitchell is where he belongs, pushing the envelope as a courageous test pilot and dodging the advancement in rank that would ground him. So, Top Gun Maverick has been a bit of a phenomenon this year. It came out in the cinemas in May, and I saw this late in August when it's still on a cinema run and making loads of money. It's become a bit of a cultural phenomenon. So stepping into the rather large shoes of the late great Tony Scott is director Joseph Kosinski. He directed Tron Legacy and things like Only the Brave and recently Spiderhead. The story was written by Peter Craig, who did Bad Boys for Life, The Batman and The Town, and also Justin Marks, who did The Jungle Book. So usually if you've got a story credit, it means you were the first screenwriters brought in, your final script wasn't used and it was changed a bit, but you still get a story credit. So the actual screenplay has 3 people credited on it. Aaron Kruger from the Ring movies and also 3 of the Transformers films, Eric Warren Singer from American Hustle and Only the Brave, with the same director as this, and most interestingly to me, Christopher McQuarrie, who, one of the great screenwriters, wrote Usual Suspects, of course, and has worked very closely with Tom Cruise on things like Jack Reacher, Edge of Tomorrow, and the most recent Mission Impossible movies. You get the feeling that I think Cruise was a producer here. You get the feeling that maybe he brought in McQuarrie to do that final script polish, and I'd imagine some of the best moments maybe came from his pen or his fingers. So you've got very few returning characters actually. Tom Cruise obviously is Maverick. You do get to see Val Kilmer as Iceman. There's a character called Warlock played by Charles Parnell, and I'm not 100% certain if he is. They make it sound like he was in the first movie, but I thought there was a Warlock in the first movie. It certainly isn't the same actor. Charles Parnell is from Transformers Age of Extinction and TV series The Last Ship. So it is kind of a throwback, but maybe there was a Warlock in the first film, but I couldn't find that information anywhere. So the new characters, you've got some really good actors. You've got Miles Teller playing Rooster, who is Goose's son from the first movie. Jennifer Connelly is the new love interest, Penny, although she was mentioned in the first film as being Maverick's ex, so there's kind of a link there. You've got other heavyweights like John Hamm is in this film. Ed Harris has a brief role, lending his instant military gravitas, a bit like Michael Ironside did in the first movie. And then you've got some of the new people include Bashir Salahuddin from Marriage Story and Snatched. You've got Glenn Powell from The Expendables 3 and The Bad Guys. He plays Hangman. And you've got Monica Barbaro from The Cathedral and I'm Charlie Walker. She plays Phoenix, because you do have female pilots in this movie as it has moved with the times. Now, I've always been a fan of Tony Scott movies. Things like True Romance and Man on Fire are films I look back on fondly. But I'll be honest, I was never a big fan of the original Top Gun. Now, I appreciate it where it sat in pop culture, but found it to be lacking as a movie overall. I always found it a bit slight. I am maybe the one person on the planet, don't shoot me for this, who actually leans more towards Days of Thunder, despite knowing that was a very obvious attempt to recreate the same magic on the ground. I do think the fact that all the girls in my school had Tom Cruise posters maybe affected my opinion of his films during my formative years, and it took me a long time to kind of realise he is a good actor, not just this pretty boy. So before I watched this long-awaited sequel, I did rewatch the original, and once again I had mixed feelings about it. Some of it really hadn't aged well at all, while the iconic moments were still just that. The central romance didn't quite work for me in the original film. It was more the bromance moments and the male bonding, and Maverick's arc from being an arrogant know-it-all to a team player that made it still work. Fast forward to now, and I feel the new writers and director have lent into the best bits of the original and made something that actually really worked well today. Making a sequel to a film 36 years later is either genius or madness, but with nostalgia being extremely popular and with Tom Cruise seemingly unable to age, this was very well timed. With Cobra Kai, for example, that TV show didn't take the original films too seriously and built around it with a balance of younger characters who were mainly the offspring of the original leads. With a TV show, you can change the tone, and you almost need to. So let's compare it to something else. Creed, and even more so Creed 2, following on from the Rocky movies, they kept the tone of the original films and built around it, once again, with a balance of younger characters who are often the offspring of the lead characters. And that's kind of what happens here. Admittedly, it's only really Goose's son that is an offspring from the first movie, but he plays such a pivotal role. He's kind of the emotional heart of the movie. He's the throwback to the bits in the original. You get some great moments seeing him as a child with Maverick and with Goose and with his mother, and it all kind of ties the film together, the heart of the film. I don't think this film would work. When it originally was announced, a little bit like Creed 2, I was like, oh, that seems really obvious. That seems a bit forced. But actually, I think it's the thing that makes this film work. Now, Kelly McGillis's Charlie isn't mentioned, or if she was, I missed it. They may have their reasons for not bringing the character or the actress back, but it does feel odd to write her out of the history completely. At its simplest level, Top Gun was an officer and a gentleman style military love story, so not picking up that thread was odd. And they're kind of relying on us going, well, he's a different person now and it's more suited to Penny, who was his ex in the first film. I think that might have been easier to understand if we'd actually seen her in that movie. So Top Gun was a cheese fest, let's be honest. And Top Gun Maverick manages to recreate that cheese without ever being too knowing or too arch. There's no modern Marvel-style self-referential jokiness. They play it straight, and it does work in a similar way to Creed 2. People in the showing I went to were actually punching the air at times, and it had that kind of feel-good communal experience. So let's talk about the throwbacks to the original. The nods. Well, they're not really nods, they're more full-body movements. You've got the way Pete Mitchell ends up back at Top Gun. You've got the way he's in the bar with the younger characters who don't realise he's their new instructor. And I'd say about 20, maybe even 30 other moments. For me, it just about worked. It trod that fine line of self-parody and just being, just making the right decision. But it did work. I think it stayed just on that right side. It knew you were invested in the original, but it did its own thing as well. I mean, even the music was mainly dropped in from the first film, and I wasn't sure how to feel about that, but it did work. It did. It almost felt like going back in time. Well, these nods, they did work until I think, personally, the final act, but I'm going to come back to that. They did explain why Meg Ryan wasn't in it, and having Val Kilmer in the movie worked really well. Having watched a documentary about his health condition, hearing his voice being recreated digitally here was very affecting. In fact, the whole film was far more emotional than I expected. They focused on Goose's death and its effect on Maverick and everyone else really well. And for me, watching an older hero reliving their mistakes and trying to do the right thing, and seeing the cocksure Maverick not know what to do and being vulnerable was really powerful. I must admit I had a tear in my eye a couple of times when Tom Cruise did on the screen. And then there's the flying scenes. They took what worked well in the first movie and turned it up to 11. It was breathtaking to watch. They elevated a silly popcorn movie to something really impressive. Seeing the characters and actors reacting to real G-force was exhilarating, and I really found the flying sequences to be really powerful. So, as we reached the final act of the film, it was sitting on a very high score, and I personally felt it was much better than the original film, which I can't quite believe they managed to pull off. The Penny romance was a little bit forced, as we had no prior investment in it, but with Jennifer Connelly, she's so good, at least it was believable. I believe those two characters were a couple, but I never quite did with Cruise and Kelly McGillis in the first film. Now, my only gripe, as I say, was the final act and the end of their mission, which I'll try and talk about without spoiling. Now, there's one extremely powerful moment that had a brilliant link back to the original, but was completely washed over. You had all these other moments that were kind of self-referential, but there was one moment that could have really made people gasp, and they kind of left it hanging, and I think that was a missed opportunity. And then for me, the film almost jumped the shark. there was one contrivance too far that made me groan, made me shake my head. It's a strange thing. You've almost got I think I've got a limit. I can take so many contrivances, but when it feels so forced, so pushed, so much in service of the plot, I almost switch out. And it did. It knocked the wind out of my sails and made me like the film a little bit less. Having said that, after the bit that I wasn't keen on, which was ridiculous, they did manage to pull it back around, and they did sink the landing, albeit in the most obvious way, but it did work, and the smile was back on my face. So, Top Gun Maverick, can you make a good movie 36 years after a film was an iconic hit? Well, when you have Tom Cruise in the lead role, and someone like Christopher McQuarrie involved with the writing, the answer is yes. I loved almost every minute of this film, and I'm going to give Top Gun Maverick 4 bags of action out of 5, despite my misgivings about the final act. Have you seen Top Gun Maverick? I think everyone has. Do you agree with my assessment of it? Feel free to comment below or get in touch with us on email, Facebook or on Twitter. We have new episodes coming out regularly alongside our full-length podcast, and don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell to get notifications. Bags of Action will always be free, but if you'd like to buy us a coffee, you can do that at our Ko-fi page.